Speaking of the offensive line and all of that stuff, of note surrounding Tyler Linderbaum, who's the belle of the ball, really, of the O-line class, but specifically at center, which is a position of need for the Raiders, Eric DeCosta, the GM for the Ravens, said that they have already made him a market-setting offer. Again, he's likely not going to hit the free agent market. I know you guys hate to hear that. A lot of people around the league do as well, because seems to be the case that everybody thinks he's going to come in and fix all their woes. I don't think he's getting out of Baltimore. We've been talking about that. A lot of the insiders have been saying that too. I just don't see why they would let him go. So again, sounds like Linderbaum is not going to ultimately going to hit free agency, especially when Baltimore is willing to pay him that kind of money. Also, too, the center market as a whole is really top-heavy and lacking a lot of depth. The next guy that comes to mind is Connor McGovern from the Bills, and there's a lot of folks that I read when I hear them, and they talk about that they think that he also ends up back in Buffalo. So there might not be a ton of options that are quality options out there at center for the Raiders, particularly in free agency, which kind of sucks given the case. But again, the Raiders have in-house a guy in Jackson Powers-Johnson, a guy in Caleb Rogers that can play center as well. They've got some positional versatility there. We'll see what happens in that regard, but also, too, don't rule out going to the draft to try and find a guy. So this week in particular, Indianapolis, I'd say you guys should be paying attention to a couple of guys who are interesting names, but also scheme fits for the Raiders as well. Logan Jones, the center from Iowa. Obviously, the Raiders got the running backs coach from Iowa, so there's a connection there. They ran a lot of that zone scheme as well, so this is a guy that has familiarity in a scheme kind of like this. They rushed for 2,300 yards, I believe 4.6 yards per carry, if memory serves me right. So that's a kid to keep an eye on. Logan Jones, again, from the center from Iowa. There's also Parker Brailsford from Alabama. He's their center as well. So he's another guy to keep an eye on. Obviously, Alabama knows what they're doing. They've cranked out some good offensive linemen over the years. I know Alex Leatherwood didn't pan out for the Raiders, but that's a quality program that's turned out some good ones. And interior offensive linemen hit more higher towards the draft at a higher rate. There was a study that came out a couple years ago that kind of dove into that, and that was a really interesting one to me. So again, Raiders could possibly be looking in the draft for that. Also, Pat Coogan, the center from Indiana, that's another kid. Obviously has, familiarity with Fernando Mendoza. Everyone talks about getting him one of his receivers. Well, how about the guy that he was snapping to? I understand that he hasn't taken a lot of snaps under center. I think it's only like 3% of the time when he was in college. But the continuity with the center, that's another thing to possibly keep in mind, and that's a team that ran the ball very well, so no doubt Coogan would grade very well as a runner, as a run blocker, that is. So keep an eye on him at the Combine. Also, Sam Hecht from Kansas State. He's got a third-round grade last time I checked, too. So another scheme fit, another interesting name, and a couple centers that you guys could kind of circle or look out when the centers do get out there, start going through drills and doing all that stuff and seeing how they do in what I call it the underwear Olympics. I'm not a huge fan of the Combine. I like to watch the tape and do all that stuff, but the Combine's here. It's an exciting time. There's always tons of news around it. Another thing we can't forget, guys, is that Seattle center last 2 years really, was an undrafted player in Jalen Sundell. So there's options where they can get guys everywhere. Kubiak worked with a guy that was a former undrafted guy, like I said, in Sundell up there. They'd fared pretty well. Obviously, people thinking they may end up replacing him. Again, free agent market at center, not looking all that great, so we'll see what happens for them there. But that offense was cooking pretty good and had a top 5 rushing attack with a kid that was a former undrafted player the season before. So I think the Raiders will be able to figure it out. Again, trust in this staff. I think this staff is just in a much better situation, much better position. Everyone just seems lock and step from the GM all the way down, that everyone's on the same page of where they're going. And that's what you need. You need that synergy and that continuity.